The wedding dress hung from a wooden post outside the mercantile in Deadwood, Dakota Territory, swaying in the hot August wind of 1878 like a ghost dancing alone. And Penelope Foster stood beside it with her jaw set, and her heart somewhere far below the dusty street. She had pinned a small hand-lettered sign to the bodice that read simply, "For sale, best offer." The fabric was ivory silk with delicate lace along the collar and sleeves, imported all the way from St. Louis 3 years ago when she had been a different woman entirely, when Robert had been alive, when hope had seemed as endless as the Dakota sky. Now she was 24 years old and selling the dress because she needed to eat more than she needed memories. The morning sun climbed higher, turning Deadwood's Main Street into a ribbon of gold dust and lengthening shadows. Miners stumbled from the saloons, squinting against the light. Wagons rattled past loaded with timber from the hills. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. Life moved forward whether Penelope wanted it to or not. "How much you asking?" A woman's voice pulled her attention. Mrs. Henderson, the baker's wife, had stopped to examine the dress with critical eyes. $40, Penelope said, though the words stuck in her throat like thorns. Mrs. Henderson made a disapproving sound. "That is steep for a used garment, widow or no. It was expensive when it was new." Penelope kept her voice steady, refusing to show how much she needed the money. Desperation was something people could smell in this town, and they used it against you. "I will give you 15. 35 and not a cent less." Mrs. Henderson sniffed and walked away, her skirts kicking up little clouds of dirt. Penelope watched her go and felt something inside her chest tighten. She had been standing here for 2 hours, and Mrs. Henderson was only the third person to even ask. Most folks just looked at the dress with pity in their eyes before hurrying past, as if widowhood might be contagious. Robert had died 18 months ago in a mining accident up in the hills. One moment he had been kissing her goodbye before his shift, and the next moment men were carrying his broken body down the mountain on a makeshift stretcher. They said a support beam had given way. They said he had not suffered. They said a lot of things that were supposed to make her feel better, but only made the silence in their small cabin louder. She had tried to keep going. She worked as a seamstress, taking in mending and alterations, but Deadwood had 3 other seamstresses and not enough work to go around. Her savings had dwindled like snow in spring. Last week, her landlord had told her she had until the end of the month to pay what she owed or find somewhere else to live. Hence the dress. Penelope smoothed her hands over her simple brown skirt, so different from the silk creation hanging beside her. She had worn that dress for exactly 4 hours on her wedding day. 4 hours of being the prettiest thing in a rough mining town, of feeling like a princess in a fairy tale her mother used to read to her back in Ohio. 4 hours before she became just another miner's wife trying to make a home in the wilderness. Now even those 4 hours were for sale. "That is a mighty fine dress." The voice was deep, masculine, and unfamiliar. Penelope turned to find a man studying the garment with surprising intensity. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that strained the fabric of his dark blue shirt. His hat was pushed back just enough to reveal sun-bronzed features and eyes the color of creek water. Mid-30s, she guessed, with the kind of weathered handsomeness that came from years of outdoor work. "Thank you," she said, shifting into the polite saleswoman tone she had been practicing all morning. "I am asking $35 for it." The man nodded slowly, still looking at the dress rather than at her. His jaw was strong and clean-shaven, unusual in a town where most men wore beards. There was something careful in the way he stood, as if he were trying to take up less space than his frame naturally commanded. "That seems more than fair for workmanship like this." He reached out and touched the lace with surprising gentleness. His hands were large and calloused, but moved with precision. My late wife had a dress somewhat similar, not quite as fine as this one, but the lace reminds me of it. I am sorry for your loss, Penelope said automatically, though the words sparked a flicker of kinship. Another person who knew what it meant to have the word late attached to someone who should still be living. Thank you, madam. It has been 4 years now. Some days it feels like yesterday, and some days it feels like a lifetime ago. He finally looked at her, and his eyes were kind in a way that made her chest ache. You are Mrs. Foster, are you not? Your husband was Robert Foster, worked the homestake mine. Yes. The admission came out smaller than she intended. I am sorry. I heard he was a good man. He was. Penelope swallowed against the sudden thickness in her throat. The best. The man nodded and turned his attention back to the dress. My name is Thomas Morrison. I have a ranch about 5 miles south of here, up against the hills. Came into town for supplies. Pleased to make your acquaintance, Mr. Morrison. Call me Thomas, please. He tilted his head, studying the dress from another angle. This might sound like an odd question, but would you be willing to model it? I would like to see how it looks when worn. Heat flooded Penelope's cheeks. I hardly think that would be proper, sir. I apologize. I should have explained myself better. Thomas held up a hand, and there was genuine contrition in his expression. I have a daughter. She will be 18 come October. I had been thinking about what I might give her as a gift, something special to mark the occasion. A dress this fine might suit. Understanding dawned. Penelope's embarrassment faded, replaced by calculation. A rancher with a daughter to spoil might be willing to pay the full asking price or even more. How tall is your daughter? About your height, I would say. You two might be similar in build as well, from what I can tell. Penelope hesitated. She had worn the dress only once and had never planned to wear it again. Putting it on felt like it might crack something inside her that she had been carefully holding together. But $40 would pay her rent and buy food for 2 months. It would give her time to find more work or figure out what to do next. There is a changing room inside the mercantile, she said finally. Give me a few minutes. The interior of the mercantile was dim and cool after the bright heat of the street. Mr. Patterson, who owned the store, barely glanced up from his ledger as Penelope carried the dress through to the small back room he allowed ladies to use for trying on ready-made garments. Her hands shook slightly as she unfastened the buttons of her everyday dress. The wedding dress slid over her head like water, the silk cool against her skin. It still fit perfectly. She had been the same size on her wedding day, would probably stay this size for the rest of her life. The buttons were tiny and difficult to reach, and she struggled with the ones at the back of her neck, finally getting them fastened through sheer determination. When she looked at herself in the small, somewhat cloudy mirror, she saw a stranger. The dress transformed her from a tired widow in worn cotton into something else entirely. Something elegant and hopeful and utterly out of place in deadwood. She blinked back tears and lifted her chin. This was business, nothing more. Thomas Morrison was waiting where she had left him, though he had removed his hat and held it in his hands like a man in church. When she stepped out onto the street, his expression shifted into something she could not quite read. Surprise, maybe, or appreciation. Or something deeper that made her pulse quicken inexplicably. It is beautiful, he said quietly. You are beautiful. The compliment landed like a physical touch. Penelope felt herself flush again. Thank you. Does it seem like something your daughter would like? Thomas did not answer immediately. He circled her slowly, examining the dress from all angles with that same careful attention. Up close, she could smell leather and sage and something clean like soap. He stopped in front of her again, and when their eyes met, there was an intensity there that made her breath catch. "Mrs. Foster, I am going to make you an offer that might sound strange. All right. I will give you $100 for the dress." Penelope's mouth fell open. $100 was a fortune, nearly 3 times what she had been asking. "That is far too much, Mr. Morrison. Let me finish, please." He shifted his weight, and she realized he was nervous. This big, confident rancher was actually nervous. "I will give you $100, but I have a condition attached to the money." Her stomach dropped. Of course there was something else. Men did not simply give widows vast sums of money out of kindness. "What condition?" Thomas met her gaze squarely. "I want you to wear it again. Not now, not today. But I want you to come out to my ranch, meet my daughter, have dinner with us, and I want you to wear this dress when you come." "I do not understand. I know it sounds peculiar." He ran a hand through his dark hair, mussing it slightly. "But I lost my wife 4 years ago, and my daughter lost her mother. We have been alone out there, just the 2 of us and the ranch hands, and I think we have both forgotten what it is like to have grace and beauty at our dinner table. I would like to give Sarah something special for her birthday. Not just a dress, but an evening of elegance, a reminder that there is more to life than work and survival." Penelope stared at him. The request was unusual, certainly, but there was such sincerity in his voice that she found herself believing him, and $100 would change everything. She could pay her rent, buy supplies, maybe even put some aside for the winter. Just dinner. Nothing more, she had to be certain. Just dinner. "You have my word as a gentleman." Thomas placed his hat over his heart in a gesture that would have seemed theatrical from anyone else, but felt genuine from him. "I would send a wagon for you. You would dine with us, wear the dress so my daughter can see what a lady looks like when she is all dressed up, and then the wagon would bring you safely back to town. You would keep the dress and the money both. Why would you pay so much for something you could arrange for far less?" Thomas was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "Because I know what it costs to let go of memories, Mrs. Foster. I saw your face when you were hanging that dress up this morning. I was across the street at the hardware store, and I could see how much it hurt you to put it up for sale. That dress means something to you. So if I am asking you to wear it again, to share it with strangers, then I should pay what it is actually worth. Not just the fabric and lace, but the weight of what it represents." Something in Penelope's chest cracked open. This man, this stranger, understood. He saw her grief and was not trying to minimize it or rush her past it. He was simply acknowledging it existed and had value. "When would you want me to come?" "A week from Saturday. That would give you time to prepare, and it falls just before Sarah's birthday." Penelope did the calculations in her head. That would give her enough time to pay her rent and still have the dress cleaned if needed. "I would need half the payment now, if you do not mind. I have bills that cannot wait." "Of course." Thomas pulled out a leather wallet and counted out $50 in bills that he handed to her with the solemnity of a business transaction. "The rest when you arrive at the ranch. Do we have an agreement?" She looked at the money in her hand, then at the dress she was wearing, then at the face of this strange, kind man who somehow saw her as something more than a desperate widow. "Yes, Mr. Morrison, we have an agreement." "Thomas, please. Then you should call me Penelope." He smiled for the first time, and it transformed his entire face from merely handsome to something that made her heart stutter. "Penelope it is. I will send the wagon for you at 3 o'clock a week from Saturday. The ranch is called the Double M if anyone asks where you are going." "I will be ready." They shook hands, his grip firm but not crushing, and then he replaced his hat and walked away with long, easy strides. Penelope stood in the street wearing her wedding dress and holding more money than she had seen in months, feeling like the world had just tilted slightly off its axis. The following week passed in a strange blur of activity and anxiety. Penelope paid her rent, which earned her a surprised grunt from her landlord. She bought supplies at the mercantile, real supplies instead of the bare minimum she had been surviving on. Coffee and sugar and flour, and even a small piece of beef for a stew. She ate better that week than she had in months, but mostly she thought about Thomas Morrison and his unusual request. She asked around town about him, carefully casual in her inquiries. The picture that emerged was of a man well respected but somewhat mysterious. He had arrived in Dakota Territory about 6 years ago with a young daughter and enough money to buy a sizable piece of land. He ran cattle and horses both, employed half a dozen ranch hands year-round, and apparently did quite well for himself. He came to town perhaps once a month for supplies, but otherwise kept to himself. Decent man, the livery owner told her. Pays his bills on time, treats his horses well. That tells you most of what you need to know about a fellow. His wife died in childbirth, Mrs. Henderson added when Penelope stopped by the bakery. The woman's tone had more sympathy now that she knew Penelope had actually sold the dress. Fourth baby, I heard. The child died too. Terrible tragedy. He has had housekeepers over the years, but no one permanent. I suppose a ranch is no place for a refined woman. Penelope absorbed this information with a growing sense of connection to this man she barely knew. They had both lost spouses. They both understood the particular loneliness that came from sleeping in a bed that used to hold 2 people. They both knew what it meant to wake up every morning and remember all over again that the person you loved was gone. On Thursday, she took the dress to a Chinese laundry run by a quiet man named Chen who did immaculate work. He handled the silk with reverence and promised to have it ready by Friday afternoon. When Penelope picked it up, it looked even more beautiful than she remembered, the ivory fabric glowing softly in the afternoon light. Friday night, she barely slept. She kept imagining what the ranch would look like, what Thomas's daughter would be like, what it would feel like to sit at a dinner table as a guest instead of sitting alone in her small cabin. The thoughts swirled through her mind like leaves in a windstorm. Saturday morning dawned clear and warm. Penelope spent longer than usual arranging her hair, twisting the honey-colored strands into an elegant knot at the base of her neck. She had a pearl necklace that had belonged to her mother, and she fastened it carefully around her throat. Her everyday dress was clean and pressed, suitable for traveling. The wedding dress she wrapped carefully in brown paper and twine, creating a neat package that would protect it during the wagon ride. At precisely 3 o'clock, a wagon pulled up outside her cabin. The driver was a young man, probably early 20s, with a friendly face and respectful manner. "Mrs. Foster, I am here from the Double M Ranch. Name's Billy." "Thank you, Billy." Penelope allowed him to help her up onto the wagon seat, her package balanced on her lap. The ride out of Deadwood took them south along a well-maintained road that climbed gradually into the hills. The landscape was beautiful in the late summer afternoon, all golden grass and dark pine trees against a sky so blue it hurt to look at. They passed other ranches and homesteads, each one carved out of the wilderness through determination and backbreaking work. Billy kept up a steady stream of cheerful conversation, pointing out landmarks and telling her about the ranch. "Mr. Morrison runs about 300 head of cattle and maybe 40 horses. Best horses in the territory, if you ask me. He has got a real eye for good bloodlines. Miss Sarah, she is real excited about tonight. She has been helping Cookie prepare for 2 days now." Sarah is his daughter. "Yes, madam. Sweet girl. Smart as a whip, too. Mr. Morrison had a tutor come out from town for years to make sure she got a proper education. Now she mostly reads on her own. I have never seen anyone go through books the way she does." Penelope relaxed slightly. The picture Billy painted was of a normal, happy household. Not anything sinister or strange, just a father and daughter doing their best. The ranch came into view as they crested a small rise. It was larger than Penelope had anticipated, a sprawling complex of buildings arranged around a central yard. The main house was 2 stories, built from lumber and stone with a wide porch that wrapped around the front and sides. Corrals and outbuildings spread out behind it, and she could see cattle grazing in distant pastures. It looked prosperous and well-maintained, and nothing like the rough mining camps and thrown-together shacks that dominated Deadwood. Thomas emerged from the house as the wagon rolled to a stop. He had cleaned up, she noticed, wearing dark trousers and a white shirt that looked freshly pressed. His hair was still damp, as if he had recently bathed. The sight of him made her pulse quicken in a way that felt both alarming and oddly pleasant. "Penelope, welcome." He helped her down from the wagon with an easy strength that reminded her how long it had been since a man had touched her, even in such an innocent way. "I hope the ride was not too uncomfortable." "It was lovely, actually. The countryside is beautiful." "It is it not?" "That is what drew me here in the first place." He gestured toward the house. "Please, come inside. Sarah is eager to meet you." The interior of the house was as impressive as the exterior. Wooden floors gleamed in the afternoon light streaming through large windows. The furniture was well made and comfortable looking, a mix of practical pieces and a few more elegant items that spoke of wealth and taste. Paintings hung on the walls, actual oil paintings in frames, not just the cheap prints most people made do with. A young woman appeared from what Penelope assumed was the kitchen. She had dark hair like her father and the same creek water eyes, though hers were bright with curiosity and excitement. She wore a simple dress that was nevertheless nicer than everyday wear, and her hair was arranged in careful curls. "You must be Mrs. Foster. I am Sarah Morrison. I am so pleased to meet you." She spoke quickly, the words tumbling out in a rush that betrayed her youth despite her approaching 18th birthday. "Father told me about the dress and about you coming to dinner, and I have been so excited I could barely stand it all week." Penelope found herself smiling despite her nervousness. "I am pleased to meet you too, Sarah, and please call me Penelope. Are you really going to wear your wedding dress for dinner? Father said it was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen." Thomas cleared his throat. "I said it was a beautiful dress, Sarah. Do not exaggerate." But when his eyes met Penelope's over his daughter's head, there was something there that suggested Sarah might not have been exaggerating after all. "I did bring it, yes," Penelope said, holding up her package. "Though I confess I feel a bit silly about the whole arrangement." "There is nothing silly about beauty and elegance," Thomas said firmly. "The world tries to grind us down to nothing but work and survival. There is no shame in pushing back against that, in creating moments of grace." He paused, then added with a slight smile, "Besides, Cookie has been cooking for 2 days. It would be a shame to let all that food go to waste with a somber atmosphere." Sarah laughed. "Cookie has been in the kitchen cursing in French and making the most amazing smells. I tried to sneak a taste of the dessert earlier and nearly lost a hand." "There is a room upstairs where you can change," Thomas told Penelope. "Take your time. We will not eat until 5, so you have over an hour." The room he showed her to was clearly a guest bedroom, decorated in soft blues and creams with a large window that looked out over the ranch. A porcelain washing basin stood on a small table, filled with fresh water. Someone had even laid out clean towels and a small vase of wildflowers. Penelope unwrapped the dress carefully and laid it across the bed. In this setting, it looked even more beautiful, the silk gleaming against the simple quilt. She washed her face and hands, then began the process of changing. The dress still fit perfectly. She managed the buttons with only slightly less difficulty than before, and examined herself in the small mirror above the washing stand. The woman looking back at her was both familiar and strange. Familiar because this was how she had looked on her wedding day. Strange because she had never imagined wearing this dress anywhere except for Robert. But Robert was gone, and she was still here, and apparently life had decided to offer her unexpected opportunities to wear silk and have dinner at a prosperous ranch. She took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and went downstairs. Thomas was in the main room, standing by the window with a glass of what looked like whiskey in his hand. He turned when he heard her on the stairs, and the expression that crossed his face made her glad she had something to hold on to. He looked at her like she was something precious and rare, like she was light walking into a dark room. Penelope. Her name was barely a whisper. Sarah appeared from the kitchen and let out an actual squeal of delight. "Oh, it is perfect. You look like a princess." "Hardly that," Penelope said, but she was smiling. Sarah's enthusiasm was infectious. "Father, does she not look beautiful?" "She does," Thomas said, his voice rough. "She absolutely does." Dinner was served in a formal dining room that Penelope suspected rarely got used. The table was set with real china and crystal glasses, and candles glowed in silver holders. Cookie, who turned out to be a middle-aged Frenchman with a magnificent mustache, had indeed outdone himself. They started with a delicate soup, then moved on to roasted beef with vegetables and potatoes. There was fresh bread with butter, a salad with greens that must have come from a carefully tended garden, and wine that Cookie had apparently been saving for a special occasion. But more than the food, it was the conversation that made the evening extraordinary. Sarah asked Penelope dozens of questions about her life, about Deadwood, about what it was like to work as a seamstress. Thomas added his own questions, creating a dialogue that felt natural and comfortable despite the formality of the setting. Penelope found herself talking more than she had in months, telling stories about the odd requests she got from customers, about the characters who populated Deadwood, about her journey from Ohio to Dakota Territory. She made them laugh with her description of Mrs. Henderson trying to negotiate down the price of everything she bought. She once spent 20 minutes arguing with Mr. Patterson about the cost of a spool of thread, Penelope said. 20 minutes, over something that cost 5 cents. "I know Mrs. Henderson," Sarah said, giggling. "She came to the ranch once trying to sell Father some of her baked goods. She told him they were the finest in the territory and he would be lucky to have them." "What did you do?" Penelope asked Thomas. "I bought 6 loaves of bread I did not need and donated them to the church." He shrugged. It seemed easier than arguing. "Father cannot stand conflict," Sarah told Penelope in a stage whisper. "He would rather pay too much than negotiate." "That is not true. I negotiate with cattle buyers all the time." "That is different. That is business." "And what do you call buying bread from Mrs. Henderson? Charity." They all laughed, and Penelope felt something warm bloom in her chest. This was what she had missed. Not just the food or the elegant setting, but the feeling of being part of something. The connection of shared laughter and conversation. The sense that she mattered to the people around her. After dinner, Cookie brought out a spectacular dessert, a layered cake with cream and berries that must have taken hours to prepare. They ate it slowly, savoring every bite while Sarah told Penelope about the books she had been reading. "I just finished Little Women," she said. "Have you read it?" "I have not had much time for reading lately," Penelope admitted, "but I have heard it is wonderful. I could lend it to you if you would like." The casual offer, the assumption that Penelope would be coming back, made her heart squeeze. That would be lovely, thank you. As the evening wore on, the conversation drifted to deeper topics. Sarah asked about Penelope's late husband, and though it hurt to talk about Robert, it also felt good to say his name out loud, to share memories of him with people who listened with genuine interest. "He sounds like he was a good man," Thomas said quietly when she finished telling a story about Robert trying to cook dinner for her birthday and nearly burning down their cabin. "He was. I was lucky to have him, even if it was not for long enough. I understand that feeling." Their eyes met across the table, and in that moment, Penelope felt a connection so intense it was almost frightening. Here was someone who truly understood, someone who had loved and lost and somehow kept going. Sarah yawned and tried to hide it behind her hand. The clock on the mantel showed nearly 9. "I am sorry," she said. "I do not know why I am so tired." "It has been a long, exciting day," Thomas said gently. "Why do not you go on up to bed? I will make sure Penelope gets home safely. But I wanted to stay up and talk more." "We will have other opportunities." He said it casually, but his eyes were on Penelope when he spoke, asking a question without words. Sarah said her goodnights, hugging Penelope with surprising warmth before heading upstairs. "Thank you for wearing the dress," she whispered. "It made tonight feel magical." "You are very welcome, sweetheart." When Sarah had gone, the house fell into a comfortable quiet. Thomas poured them each a small glass of brandy and led Penelope out to the porch. The night air was cool and smelled of sage and pine. Stars blazed overhead, more stars than she ever saw in Deadwood with its lamps and fires. "Thank you for tonight," Thomas said, settling into one of the porch chairs. "It meant more than I can properly express." Penelope sat in the chair beside him, the silk dress rustling softly. "I should be thanking you. That was the nicest evening I have had since before Robert died. Sarah adores you already. She has been lonely, I think, without female company. The ranch hands are good men, but they are not exactly refined conversationalists. She is a wonderful girl. You should be very proud." "I am." He took a sip of his brandy, staring out at the dark shapes of the hills against the starlit sky. Her mother would have been proud too. Margaret was determined that Sarah would grow up educated and capable, not limited by being a woman in a rough territory. "Margaret was your wife?" "Yes. We met in St. Louis. She was a teacher's daughter, refined and educated, and I was a rancher's son trying to make enough money to start my own spread. I have no idea what she saw in me, but she agreed to marry me anyway." His voice was soft with memory. "We had 6 good years together before complications with the 4th baby took them both. I am so sorry. It was 4 years ago, like I said. The grief does not go away, but it changes shape, becomes something you carry instead of something that carries you, if that makes sense." "It does." Penelope turned her glass in her hands, watching the brandy catch the light from inside the house. "Some days I still wake up and reach for Robert before I remember. Other days I go hours without thinking about him, and then I feel guilty for forgetting. The guilt is the worst part." "Yes." They sat in silence for a while, but it was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the quiet of 2 people who understood each other, who did not need to fill every moment with words. Finally, Thomas said, "I have a confession to make." Penelope looked at him. "What is that?" "I did not really buy the dress for Sarah's birthday. I mean, I will give it to her if she wants it, but that was not my true motivation." Her heart began to beat faster. "What was your true motivation?" "I wanted to see you again. I saw you that morning, hanging the dress with such sadness on your face, and I wanted to do something to help. But I also wanted an excuse to spend time with you. The dress and the dinner were just a way to make that happen without seeming too forward." Penelope did not know what to say. She should probably feel offended or deceived, but instead she felt something warm and bright expanding in her chest. "I should have been honest from the start," Thomas continued. "But I was afraid you would say no if you knew I was interested in courting you. It has been 4 years since Margaret died, and I have not looked at another woman in all that time. Then I saw you, and it was like waking up from a long sleep. I wanted to know you. I wanted to hear you laugh. I wanted to see if there might be something possible between us." "And what do you think now?" Penelope asked quietly. "I think you are remarkable. I think you have strength and grace and a good heart. I think my daughter is already half in love with you." He paused. "And I think I would very much like to see you again if you would allow it." Penelope's mind raced. This was happening so fast. She had come here to wear a dress and earn money, and now this man was talking about courting her. Part of her wanted to run, to protect herself from the possibility of more loss and pain. But another part, a part that had been dormant since Robert died, was waking up and reaching toward this chance at connection. "I would like that," she heard herself say. "I would like to see you again." Thomas's smile was like the sun coming up. "You would?" "Yes. Though I think we should take things slowly. We barely know each other." "Slowly is good. I am not a young man in a rush. I just want the chance to know you better, to see if what I felt tonight is real or just the effect of candlelight and a beautiful dress." "It was a beautiful evening," Penelope agreed. "But I think you should know, I do not have much to offer. I am a widow with very little money, making a living as a seamstress in a mining town. I am not refined like your wife was. I am just an ordinary woman trying to survive." "There is nothing ordinary about you, Penelope Foster." Thomas set down his glass and leaned forward, his expression intense. "And I do not care about money or refinement. I care about character and kindness and whether I enjoy spending time with someone. Everything else is just details." They talked until nearly midnight, long past the time Penelope should have started back to town. They talked about their childhoods, their hopes, their fears. Thomas told her about building the ranch from nothing, about the satisfaction of watching something grow from hard work and planning. Penelope told him about learning to sew from her mother, about the decision to follow Robert to Dakota Territory, even though it meant leaving everything familiar behind. Finally, Thomas said reluctantly, "I should get you back to town. It is late and you must be exhausted." "I should probably change out of the dress first." "Of course." Upstairs, Penelope carefully removed the wedding dress and folded it with hands that trembled slightly. Everything had changed in the course of one evening. She had come here as a widow selling her past, and she was leaving as a woman with the possibility of a future. When she came back downstairs in her regular dress, the wedding dress wrapped in its brown paper, Thomas was waiting with a small leather bag. "The rest of your payment," he said, handing it to her. $50 as agreed. You do not have to pay me now that you have admitted the real reason you invited me. A deal is a deal. Besides, you more than earned it. You gave Sarah a memory she will treasure for the rest of her life." He paused. "You gave me something precious too." "What is that?" "Hope." The word hung in the air between them, small and fragile and impossibly powerful. Billy had already brought the wagon around. Thomas helped Penelope up onto the seat, his hand lingering on hers for just a moment longer than necessary. "May I call on you in town next week? I would like that. Wednesday afternoon. I could take you to dinner at the hotel restaurant. That sounds lovely." He stepped back and Billy clicked to the horses. As the wagon pulled away, Penelope looked back to see Thomas standing in the yard, a dark silhouette against the lighted windows of the house. He raised a hand in farewell, and she waved back. The ride to town passed in a blur. Billy tried to make conversation, but Penelope was too lost in her own thoughts to do more than give minimal responses. She kept replaying the evening in her mind, examining it from every angle, trying to understand what had happened and what it might mean. By the time they reached her cabin, she had come to a decision. She would give this a chance. She would let herself hope again. It was terrifying and risky and probably foolish, but the alternative was to spend the rest of her life alone in grief, and suddenly that seemed like the greater danger. The next few days crawled by with agonizing slowness. Penelope went about her normal routine, taking in mending and alterations, shopping for supplies, attending church on Sunday. But underneath the normal activities, she was hyper-aware of the coming Wednesday, counting down the hours until she would see Thomas again. Word had gotten around town that she had been to the Double M Ranch for dinner. Mrs. Henderson cornered her at the Mercantile on Tuesday morning, full of questions and barely disguised nosiness. "I heard you went out to Thomas Morrison's place wearing that wedding dress," she said, her eyes bright with curiosity. "What on earth for?" "He wanted to see it for his daughter," Penelope said, keeping her voice neutral, "as a potential birthday gift. And did she want it? We have not decided yet. He is a fine-looking man, Thomas Morrison," Mrs. Henderson continued, undeterred, "and wealthy too. A widow could do worse than catching his eye." "I am not trying to catch anyone's eye, Mrs. Henderson. I was simply having dinner." But the older woman smirked knowingly. "Of course, dear. Simply dinner. And I suppose those new ribbons you just bought are simply ribbons." Penelope looked down at the ribbons in her hand, delicate blue ones that would look lovely in her hair, and felt her cheeks heat. "I needed new ribbons. My old ones are worn out. Hum. Mrs. Henderson patted her arm. "Well, if you are not interested in Thomas Morrison, there are plenty of other women in this territory who would be. Do not wait too long to make up your mind." The implied competition should have annoyed Penelope, but instead it made her more determined. Wednesday could not come fast enough. When the day finally arrived, Penelope spent far too long getting ready. She washed and arranged her hair 3 different times before settling on a simple style with the new blue ribbons woven through. She wore her second-best dress, a dark green cotton that brought out the color of her eyes. She even put on a tiny bit of rouge that she had not touched since Robert's funeral. Thomas arrived at precisely 2 o'clock, driving a small buggy rather than a wagon. He was dressed in what must have been his town clothes, dark trousers and a jacket with a string tie. His hat was brushed clean of dust, and he smelled faintly of bay rum. "You look beautiful," he said, helping her into the buggy. "You look quite handsome yourself." The hotel restaurant was the nicest dining establishment in Deadwood, which admittedly was not saying much, but the food was good, and the atmosphere was relatively refined. The owner, a woman named Mrs. Yang, who had emigrated from China and married a gold prospector, kept the place cleaner and more welcoming than most of the saloons. Thomas ordered for them both, choosing roasted chicken and vegetables, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert. While they ate, they continued the conversation from Saturday night, picking up threads and following them to new places. Penelope told him about her work, about the satisfaction of taking something torn or worn and making it whole again. Thomas talked about the ranch, about his plans to expand the horse breeding operation, about his hope that Sarah might want to take over the business someday. "Most women would not want to run a ranch," Penelope observed. "Sarah is not most women. She can ride better than half my ranch hands, and she has a head for numbers that puts mine to shame." He smiled with obvious pride. "Besides, why should women be limited to certain types of work? Margaret always said that was nonsense, that a person should do whatever they are good at regardless of their sex. Your wife sounds like she was a remarkable woman." "She was. You would have liked her, I think. She had a sharp wit and no patience for foolishness. Thomas paused, his expression turning serious. I want you to know, Penelope, that seeing you, feeling interested in you, it does not diminish what I felt for Margaret. I loved her deeply. But she is gone, and I am still here, and I do not think she would want me to spend the rest of my life alone. I feel the same about Robert, Penelope said quietly. I loved him. I will always love him. But I am starting to realize that I can honor his memory while still allowing myself to live. Exactly. Their hands met across the table, fingers intertwining naturally. The contact sent warmth spreading through Penelope's body, a reminder that she was still alive, still capable of feeling. After lunch, Thomas took her for a drive around the outskirts of town, pointing out the places where Deadwood was expanding, talking about the future of the territory. It will not always be this rough, he said. Already things are settling down, becoming more civilized. In 10 years, Deadwood will be a proper town with schools and churches and families. Do you think you will stay? As long as Sarah is here, I am here, and she loves the ranch. I cannot imagine her leaving. He glanced at Penelope. What about you? Do you plan to stay in Deadwood? I have not thought much beyond making it through each month, she admitted, but I suppose I do not have anywhere else to go. My parents died years ago and I have no siblings. Deadwood is home now, for better or worse. It could be for better, Thomas said softly, if you gave it a chance. They courted through the fall, a steady progression of dinners and buggy rides and carefully supervised visits to the ranch. Sarah was a constant presence, her delight in their growing relationship evident in her bright smiles and enthusiastic chatter. She and Penelope developed their own friendship, separate from Thomas, built on shared books and conversations about life and dreams. In October, for Sarah's 18th birthday, Penelope made her a new dress using fabric Thomas had ordered special from St. Louis. It was not the wedding dress, which Penelope had decided to keep, but a beautiful day dress in deep blue that made Sarah's eyes shine. It is perfect, Sarah breathed when she tried it on. You are so talented, Penelope. I am glad you like it. I do, almost as much as I like the idea of you potentially becoming my stepmother. Penelope nearly dropped her pins. Sarah. What? Father is clearly in love with you, and you are clearly in love with him, even if you are both too proper to say it out loud yet. I am just hoping you will put him out of his misery soon and agree to marry him. He has not asked me to marry him. He will. He has been carrying around his mother's ring for 3 weeks, working up the courage. Penelope's heart began to race. How do you know that? I saw it in his bureau when I was putting away his clean shirts. A beautiful gold band with a small diamond. Mother never wore it because it was sized for Father's mother who had smaller fingers, but I bet it would fit you perfectly. That night, lying in bed in her small cabin, Penelope allowed herself to imagine it, marrying Thomas, living at the ranch, being a stepmother to Sarah. It was terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. She had promised Robert to love him forever, but Robert was gone. And Thomas was here, solid and real and offering her a future she had thought was lost forever. Did she love him? The question kept her awake long into the night. She cared for him deeply. She enjoyed his company. She admired his strength and kindness. But was that love? Then she thought about how her heart lifted when she saw him, how his smile made her feel warm and safe. How his touch, even something as simple as helping her down from a buggy, sent shivers through her body. How the thought of not seeing him made her chest ache. Yes, she realized with something like wonder. Yes, she loved him. The proposal came in November, on a clear cold day when the first snow was starting to dust the hills. Thomas had invited her to the ranch for Sunday dinner, and after they ate, he asked if she would take a walk with him. They bundled up in coats and scarves and walked out past the corrals to a small rise that overlooked the ranch. From here, you could see for miles in every direction, all the way to the distant peaks that marked the edge of the territory. "This is where I stood when I first saw this land," Thomas said. "6 years ago, when it was nothing but grass and dreams. I knew the moment I saw it that this was where I wanted to build a life. You have done a remarkable job. I had help. Good men working for me, Margaret's wisdom and support in the early years, Sarah's faith that her father was not completely crazy." He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "But it has been lonely, too. The ranch is wonderful, but a ranch is just land and cattle without someone to share it with." "Thomas, let me finish, please." He took a deep breath, and she could see he was nervous despite his calm exterior. "I love you, Penelope. I did not plan to fall in love again. I thought that part of my life was over. But you walked into my world wearing a silk dress and a sad smile, and you woke up something I thought was dead. You make me laugh. You make me think. You make me want to be better than I am. And I know we have only been courting for a few months, but at our age, we know what we want. I want you. I want to build a life with you. I want to wake up beside you every morning and fall asleep next to you every night. I want to argue with you about silly things and make up afterward. I want to grow old with you." Tears were streaming down Penelope's face, but she made no move to wipe them away. "Thomas, will you marry me, Penelope Foster? Will you wear that beautiful dress one more time and become my wife?" There was no hesitation, no doubt. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." His whoop of joy startled birds from the nearby trees. He swept her up in his arms and spun her around, both of them laughing like children. When he set her down, he kissed her for the first time, a kiss that was gentle and passionate and full of promise. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "I love you so much. Thank God, I was terrified you would say no." "Why would I say no? You are wonderful and kind, and you make me happy. You and Sarah both make me happy. Speaking of Sarah." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "She has been pestering me for weeks about when I was going to propose. I am pretty sure she has been more anxious about it than I have." The ring inside was exactly as Sarah had described, a gold band with a small but perfectly cut diamond that caught the sunlight and threw tiny rainbows. It fit Penelope's finger as if it had been made for her. They walked back to the house hand in hand, and Sarah met them at the door with such a hopeful expression that they both started laughing again. "Well," she demanded, "do I get to start planning a wedding?" "You do," Thomas confirmed. Sarah shrieked and threw her arms around Penelope. "I knew it. I knew you would say yes. Oh, this is wonderful. When will the wedding be? Where will you have it? What will you wear?" "Obviously the wedding dress, because that is perfect, but what about flowers and food and music?" "Slow down," Thomas said, but he was grinning. "We only just got engaged 5 minutes ago." "We should do it before the snow gets too deep," Sarah continued, undeterred. "Maybe in 2 weeks. That would give us time to prepare, but not so much time that the weather turns bad. We could have it here at the ranch, in the main room, and invite everyone we know. Cookie can make a cake, and we can bring in a minister from town. And oh, it will be perfect." Penelope looked at Thomas, expecting him to tell his daughter to calm down, but he just shrugged. 2 weeks sounds fine to me, if that is acceptable to you. 2 weeks. 14 days until she became Mrs. Thomas Morrison. It should have felt too fast, but instead it felt exactly right. 2 weeks is perfect. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Sarah threw herself into planning with the enthusiasm of a general organizing a military campaign. She made lists and schedules and assignments. She bullied Cookie into creating an elaborate menu. She recruited the ranch hands to help clean and decorate the house. She sent Billy into town with invitations to the few people they wanted to invite. Penelope moved through it all in a happy daze. She altered the wedding dress slightly, letting out a seam here and taking in another there to account for the small changes 3 years had made to her body. She packed up her few belongings in the cabin she was leaving behind. She gave notice to her landlord, who grunted and immediately started looking for a new tenant. Mrs. Henderson cornered her one last time at the mercantile. "I hear congratulations are in order. Thank you. You moved fast." Some might say suspiciously fast. Penelope met the older woman's eyes steadily. "Thomas and I are not children, Mrs. Henderson. We both know what we want and we see no reason to wait." "I suppose not." Mrs. Henderson sniffed. "Well, I hope you will be very happy together. I am sure we will be." And she was sure. Despite the speed of everything, despite the unconventional way they had met, despite the grief and loss that had brought them both to this point, Penelope had absolute certainty that marrying Thomas was the right choice. The wedding day dawned clear and cold, the kind of November day where the sky is so blue it almost hurts to look at. Penelope dressed in the cabin one last time, the wedding dress sliding over her head like a second skin. Sarah came to help with the buttons, her fingers quick and sure. "You look beautiful," Sarah said, stepping back to admire her work. "My father is going to cry when he sees you." "Do you really think so?" "I know so." "He loves you desperately, Penelope. I have never seen him this happy, not even before my mother died. You have given him his life back." "He has given me mine, too." They embraced, careful not to crush the dress, and then Sarah helped her into a coat for the ride to the ranch. Billy was waiting with the buggy, looking uncharacteristically nervous in a clean shirt and his best vest. "You look mighty fine, Mrs. Foster," he said, helping her up. "Thank you, Billy." The ranch had been transformed. Garlands of pine branches decorated the porch railings, and candles glowed in every window despite it being only 2 in the afternoon. Guests were already arriving, neighbors from nearby ranches, a few people from town. The ranch hands all cleaned up and looking uncomfortable in their good clothes. Thomas was waiting inside, and when Penelope walked through the door, the expression on his face made her forget how to breathe. He was wearing a dark suit that looked brand new, and his eyes shone with tears as he watched her approach. The minister, brought out from Deadwood for the occasion, cleared his throat. "Shall we begin?" The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. Penelope and Thomas stood before the minister, hands clasped, and spoke their vows in clear, strong voices. When Thomas slid a simple gold band onto her finger to rest beside the engagement ring, his hands trembled slightly. "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." The kiss was sweet and brief, mindful of their audience, but it held a promise of more to come. The room erupted in applause and cheers. Sarah was crying openly, and Cookie was wiping his eyes with his apron. The celebration that followed was joyful and raucous. Cookie had outdone himself with the food, producing platters of roasted meats and vegetables, fresh bread, pies and cakes and puddings. Someone had brought a fiddle, and there was dancing in the cleared main room. Penelope danced with Thomas, with Billy, with several of the other ranch hands, and even with Sarah. As the sun set and the party continued, Penelope found herself standing at the window, looking out at the ranch that was now her home. Thomas came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Happy," he murmured into her hair, incredibly. "Any regrets?" "Not a single one." He kissed the side of her neck, sending shivers down her spine. "I cannot wait for everyone to leave so I can have you to myself." Penelope blushed but leaned back against him. "How long do you think we have to stay at our own wedding reception?" "At least another hour or 2. Any less would be rude." "An hour or 2, she repeated, turning in his arms to face him. I suppose I can wait that long, can you? If you keep kissing me like that, probably not. He laughed and pulled her closer, and she felt the solid warmth of him, the realness of this moment. She was married again. She was Mrs. Thomas Morrison. She had a husband and a home and a daughter and a future. The thought that had once seemed impossible now felt like the most natural thing in the world. The guests finally began to leave as full darkness fell. Sarah had wisely arranged to spend the night with a neighboring ranch family, giving the newlyweds privacy. She hugged them both goodbye with a knowing smile. "Try to get some sleep," she said innocently. "Sarah." Thomas was laughing and blushing at the same time. "What? I am just concerned for your health." When the last guest had gone and the house was quiet, Thomas turned to Penelope with heat in his eyes. Alone at last, finally. He took her hand and led her upstairs to the master bedroom, a large room at the front of the house that she had only glimpsed before. Someone, probably Sarah, had lit candles around the room and turned down the bed. Rose petals were scattered across the quilt. "Your daughter is a romantic," Penelope observed. "She gets it from her mother." Thomas closed the door behind them and turned to face her. "Are you nervous?" "A little." "It has been a long time." "For me too. We can go slow." But slow became impossible as soon as he started kissing her. The passion that had been building between them for months ignited into something fierce and urgent. Penelope's fingers fumbled with the buttons of his shirt while he worked on the tiny fastenings of the wedding dress. When the silk finally fell away, pooling at her feet, Thomas just looked at her for a long moment. "You are so beautiful," he whispered. "So are you." They came together in the candlelight, learning each other's bodies with reverence and increasing passion. It was different from what Penelope had known with Robert, but that was all right. This was Thomas, and this was their beginning, and it was perfect in its own way. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the sheets, both breathing hard and smiling. Thomas traced lazy patterns on her shoulder with his fingertips. "I love you, Mrs. Morrison." "I love you too, Mr. Morrison. Think you will be happy here." Penelope looked around the room that was now hers, thought about the ranch and Sarah and the life stretching out before them. "I know I will be." The months that followed were an adjustment, but a happy one. Penelope learned the rhythms of ranch life, the early mornings and long days, the constant work that came with managing livestock and land. She took over the household management, working with Cookie to plan meals and organize the domestic side of things. She continued her sewing, making clothes for the family, and occasionally taking on special projects for neighbors. But mostly she learned how to be part of a family again. She and Sarah grew closer, their relationship evolving from stepmother and stepdaughter into something more like sisters despite the age gap. Sarah taught her to ride better, and Penelope helped Sarah with her sewing and cooking skills. And every night, she fell asleep in Thomas's arms, still marveling at the unexpected turn her life had taken. The loneliness that had defined her existence for 18 months had been replaced by connection and love and purpose. Winter settled over the ranch, bringing snow and cold that kept them mostly housebound for weeks at a time. But inside, the house was warm and full of life. They read together in the evenings, played cards, talked about everything and nothing. Cookie taught them all to make French pastries, with varying degrees of success. Sarah started teaching herself piano on the instrument that had belonged to her mother, filling the house with music. In February, Penelope realized her monthly cycle was late. She waited another 2 weeks to be sure, then told Thomas one night as they were getting ready for bed, "I think I might be with child." He froze in the act of removing his shirt. "Are you certain?" "Fairly certain. It is too early to know for sure, but all the signs are there." She was not sure how he would react. They had not specifically discussed more children, though they also had not taken any measures to prevent it, but the joy that lit up his face erased any lingering doubts. "A baby," he breathed. "We are going to have a baby. You are happy." "Happy." "I am over the moon. Penelope, this is wonderful news." He swept her up and spun her around, both of them laughing. Then he set her down carefully as if she were made of glass. "Should you be spinning? Is that safe? I am pregnant, not an invalid. Still, we should be careful. You should rest more. Maybe Cookie can take on more of the housework, and I can hire someone to help with the heavier chores." "Thomas, I am fine. Women work right up until their time. I can handle my normal responsibilities." But he insisted on pampering her anyway, fetching things she could easily get herself, worrying about her overexerting. It was annoying and endearing in equal measure. Sarah was thrilled about the prospect of a sibling. "I have always wanted a brother or sister," she said, already knitting tiny socks and hats. "Do you hope for a boy or a girl?" "I do not care as long as the baby is healthy," Penelope said honestly. "Father wants a boy, I think. Not that he would say so, but I can tell." "And what do you want?" "A sister would be fun. I could teach her all the things I know. But a brother would be nice too. I have never had a brother." The pregnancy progressed smoothly despite Penelope's initial worries. She had heard the stories, knew what had happened to Thomas's first wife. But Dr. Chen, who came out from Deadwood once a month to check on her, assured her that everything was developing normally. Spring came, turning the hills green and filling the air with the scent of wildflowers. Penelope's belly swelled, and she had to let out all her dresses. Thomas took to putting his hand on her stomach every night, marveling at the kicks and movements from within. "It is a miracle," he said one evening as the baby performed what felt like acrobatics under his palm. "Every single time, it is a miracle, even the fourth time. Especially the fourth time. I thought I would never have this again." The baby came in late September, arriving 2 weeks earlier than expected but healthy and strong. The labor was long and painful, but when the midwife finally placed a squalling, red-faced infant in Penelope's arms, she forgot all about the pain. "It is a boy," the midwife announced. "A big, healthy boy." Thomas, who had been pacing downstairs while Sarah held Penelope's hand, came rushing in at the news. He looked from his wife to his new son with such love that Penelope's eyes filled with tears. "He is perfect," Thomas whispered, touching one tiny hand with a finger. "What should we name him?" Penelope asked. They had discussed names but never quite settled on one. Now, looking at the baby, Thomas said, "What about Robert, after your first husband? He was a good man, and I would be honored to give our son his name." The gesture took Penelope's breath away. That Thomas would suggest honoring the man who had come before him, acknowledging that part of her history rather than trying to erase it, showed the depth of his love and understanding. "Robert Thomas Morrison," she said, testing the name. "I think that is perfect." Young Robert, Bobby they called him, was a contented baby who slept through the night by 2 months old and smiled at everyone who looked at him. Sarah doted on her baby brother, carrying him around and singing to him, and generally treating him like the most precious thing in the world. The ranch continued to prosper. Thomas expanded the horse breeding operation and started winning prizes at regional shows for the quality of his stock. Penelope's sewing business grew through word of mouth, and she started taking on more elaborate projects, including wedding dresses for several young women in the area. "It is fitting," she told Thomas one evening as she worked on a particularly intricate beaded bodice. "My wedding dress brought us together. Now I get to help other women have beautiful dresses for their own special days. You still have your dress, do not you? Of course. It is wrapped in tissue paper in the cedar chest in our room. You should wear it again sometime. Penelope looked up from her sewing, surprised. Why would I wear it again? I have worn it for 2 weddings already. Not a wedding, just because. Put it on for dinner some evening the way you did that first night. Remind me of the moment I fell in love with you. You fell in love with me because of a dress. I fell in love with you because of the woman wearing it. But the dress does not hurt. So one evening when Bobby was being watched by Sarah and the house was quiet, Penelope put on the wedding dress for the 3rd time. It was snugger than before, her body changed by pregnancy and motherhood, but it still fit. She came downstairs to find Thomas waiting in the dining room, which he had set with candles and the good china. "You look stunning," he said, pulling out her chair. "You are biased, absolutely. But that does not make it less true." They ate dinner together, just the 2 of them, talking and laughing like they had on that first evening nearly 2 years ago. Penelope realized that while so much had changed, the fundamental connection between them had only grown stronger. After dinner, Thomas led her outside to the porch where they had sat on that first night. The September air was cool but not cold, and the stars overhead were brilliant. "You ever regret it?" Thomas asked. "Saying yes to a stranger's odd request? Marrying a rancher and leaving your life in Deadwood behind?" Penelope leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his body. "Not for a single moment." "Good, because I cannot imagine my life without you now. You and Bobby and Sarah, you are my whole world. You are mine too." They stood there together, watching the stars wheel overhead, and Penelope thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. The grief and loss, yes, but also the unexpected chances and the courage to say yes to possibility. She had sold her wedding dress out of desperation, and it had led her to a love she had never expected to find. Life, she was learning, had a way of surprising you, of taking broken pieces and making something new and beautiful from them. The years rolled on, bringing changes and challenges, but always more joy than sorrow. Bobby grew into an energetic toddler who followed his father everywhere, determined to be a rancher like him. Sarah married a young lawyer from Deadwood when she was 21, a good man who appreciated her intelligence and independence. They settled in town but visited the ranch often. When Bobby was 3, Penelope found herself pregnant again. This time she carried the knowledge with more confidence, less fear. Thomas was still protective, but had learned to trust that she knew her own limits. The second baby was a girl, born in spring with a wild crown of dark hair and her father's green eyes. They named her Margaret after Thomas's first wife, another gesture of honoring the past while embracing the present. "2 Margarets in my life," Thomas said, holding his daughter while his wife rested. "I am the luckiest man alive." Penelope, exhausted but happy, smiled at him. "You are pretty lucky," she agreed. Little Margaret was a different baby than Bobby had been, more demanding and particular, but they loved her fiercely anyway. Bobby was initially suspicious of this small creature who took up so much of everyone's attention, but he warmed to her quickly when she smiled at him. The ranch became a gathering place for family and friends. Sarah brought her husband and eventually their own children to visit. The ranch hands became like extended family, eating Sunday dinners at the big table and celebrating holidays together. Penelope's sewing room, which had been a guest bedroom, overflowed with projects and customers. On their 5th anniversary, Thomas surprised Penelope with a gift. A portrait, painted by an artist he had commissioned from Chicago. It showed her wearing the wedding dress, standing in the parlor of their house with sunlight streaming through the windows behind her. "So we can always remember how this all started," he said as she stared at the painting with tears in her eyes, "as if I could ever forget. Still, now we have a reminder, something to show our grandchildren someday when they ask how their grandparents met." Penelope imagined that future, sitting with small children and telling them the story of the widow who sold her wedding dress and the rancher who bought it and asked her to wear it again. It seemed like a fairy tale, but it had been real, was real, every single day. By the time Penelope was 30, she and Thomas had been married for 6 years. Bobby was 5, a miniature version of his father, and Margaret was 2, already showing signs of the same determination that characterized both her mother and her sister. The ranch was thriving, the family was healthy, and Penelope found herself happier than she had ever imagined possible. One evening, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, Thomas found Penelope in the parlor, mending one of Bobby's shirts by lamplight. "Do you ever think about what your life would have been like if I had not bought that dress?" he asked, settling into the chair beside her. Penelope set down her sewing and considered the question. "Sometimes. I suppose I would have eventually sold it to someone else. Would have continued working as a seamstress in Deadwood, scraping by. Maybe I would have remarried eventually, or maybe I would have spent my whole life alone. I cannot bear to think of you alone. I cannot bear to think of it either now, but at the time I thought that was my future. Loneliness and survival and nothing more." She reached for his hand. "You gave me more than a new life, Thomas. You gave me hope again. You showed me that grief does not have to be the end of the story. You did the same for me." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, hands linked, listening to the sounds of the house settling around them. Somewhere upstairs, one of the children murmured in sleep. Outside, an owl hooted in the darkness. "I want to grow old with you," Thomas said suddenly. "I want to watch our children grow up and have children of their own. I want to sit on this porch when we are both gray and creaky, holding hands and remembering all the years we had together. I want every day for the rest of my life to have you in it. That sounds perfect to me." And it was perfect, or as close to perfect as life could be. There were hard times, of course. Years when the cattle prices were low or the weather was bad. Illnesses that had them sitting up all night with feverish children. The normal struggles that came with running a ranch and raising a family in a still rough territory. But through it all, they had each other. Thomas and Penelope, built on a foundation of shared grief and unexpected connection, growing into something deeper and stronger with every passing year. The wedding dress remained wrapped in tissue paper in the cedar chest, taken out occasionally for special occasions or when Penelope wanted to remember. Each time she saw it, she thought about that desperate morning when she had hung it for sale, never dreaming it would lead her here. Sarah used the dress for her own wedding, with Penelope's blessing. It fit her perfectly with only minor alterations, and she looked radiant walking down the aisle of the small church in Deadwood. Penelope cried through the entire ceremony, equally moved by seeing her stepdaughter marry and by the sight of the dress creating new memories. Years later, when Bobby was preparing to marry his sweetheart, a rancher's daughter from a neighboring spread, Penelope offered the dress to his bride. But Mary, the girl he had chosen, politely declined. "Thank you, but I want to find my own dress," she said with a sweet smile. "Yours has such special meaning for you and Mr. Morrison. I would not feel right wearing it. But maybe someday, if Bobby and I have a daughter, she might want to wear it." Penelope appreciated the thoughtfulness and agreed. The dress was carefully wrapped again and put back in the cedar chest, waiting for the next generation. Thomas's hair went gray at the temples, then fully silver. Penelope found her own strands of white mixing with the honey blonde. Lines deepened around their eyes and mouths, maps of all the smiling and laughter and years lived fully. Bobby took over more of the day-to-day ranch operations as Thomas slowed down. Margaret married a banker and moved to Rapid City, though she visited often with her own growing family. Sarah's children, now teenagers, spent summers at the ranch, learning to ride and work cattle. On their 20th anniversary, Thomas organized a party that brought together everyone who mattered. The house overflowed with family and friends. 3 generations gathered to celebrate. Cookie, now in his 70s but still cooking, produced a feast that had people talking for weeks. At one point, Thomas stood and called for quiet. "I want to say something," he announced to the crowded room. 20 years ago, I made a decision that changed my life. I bought a wedding dress from a woman I did not know, and I asked her to wear it to dinner. It was an impulse, a crazy idea that I nearly talked myself out of a dozen times. He found Penelope in the crowd and smiled. But I did not talk myself out of it, and that made all the difference. "Penelope, you have given me 20 years of happiness. You gave me more children, more family, more love than I ever dreamed of having. You took a lonely man and a lonely girl and made us whole again. Every day with you is a gift." Penelope was crying openly now, as were half the people in the room. Thomas crossed to her and took her hand. "I love you more today than I did on our wedding day, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today. Thank you for saying yes to a strange request from a stranger. Thank you for taking a chance on us." The room erupted in applause. Sarah was sobbing into her husband's shoulder. Bobby had his arm around Mary, both of them smiling through tears. Even the grandchildren seemed to sense the importance of the moment, quiet and attentive. That night, after everyone had gone home or gone to bed, Thomas and Penelope sat on the porch as they had so many times before. They were older now, moving more slowly, but the love between them was as strong as ever. 20 years, Penelope marveled. "It feels like yesterday and forever ago all at once." "I know what you mean." Thomas pulled her closer, and she rested her head on his shoulder. "Do you think we will get another 20? I hope so. Though even if we do not, I will be grateful for what we have had. Always looking on the bright side." "Someone has to, with your tendency toward brooding," he laughed. "I do not brood. You absolutely brood, you just call it thinking." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars and listening to the night sounds of the ranch. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. Closer, one of the horses nickered softly in the barn. "Thomas." "Yes, thank you." "For what?" "For seeing me that day. For buying the dress. For asking me to wear it. For giving me a second chance at happiness." "Penelope, I did not give you anything. You earned every bit of happiness you have through your own courage and kindness and strength. I was just lucky enough to be the man you chose to share it with." She lifted her head and kissed him, a soft kiss that held 20 years of love and partnership and shared life. When they pulled apart, she said, "We should go to bed. We are not young anymore, and staying up late makes us cranky." "Speak for yourself. I am never cranky." "Thomas Morrison, you are the crankiest man alive before you have had your morning coffee." "Well, yes, but that does not count. No one should be judged before coffee." Laughing, they made their way inside and upstairs to the bedroom they had shared for 2 decades. The cedar chest still sat at the foot of the bed, holding the wedding dress and other precious memories. Penelope patted it as she passed, a gesture of affection for the object that had brought them together. The years continued their steady march. Bobby and Mary gave them 3 grandchildren. Margaret added 2 more. Sarah's children grew up and started families of their own. The ranch was passed down to Bobby, who ran it with the same care and dedication his father had shown. Thomas and Penelope settled into the comfortable rhythms of older age. They still worked, but less intensely. Penelope still sewed, but now mostly quilts and baby clothes for the growing number of great-grandchildren. Thomas still consulted on ranch decisions, but he left the hard physical work to younger men. They spent their days together, reading and talking and enjoying the life they had built. Every evening, Weather permitting, they sat on the porch and watched the sunset paint the hills in shades of gold and orange and purple. On their 30th anniversary, surrounded by their enormous extended family, Penelope wore the wedding dress one last time. She was 54 years old now, and the dress no longer fit quite right, but she wore it anyway, this tangible connection to her past and the beginning of her future. Thomas, now 67 with white hair and a weathered face that was still the most handsome thing Penelope had ever seen, looked at her with the same awe he had shown 30 years ago. "Still the most beautiful woman I have ever seen," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Still the smoothest talker in Dakota," she replied, but she was smiling. Their grandchildren and great-grandchildren gathered around, wanting to hear the story again. How had Grandma and Grandpa met? Why did Grandpa buy a wedding dress? What was it like in the old days? Penelope and Thomas told the story together, finishing each other's sentences, adding details and context. They talked about Deadwood in 1878, about the mining town and the rough conditions, about grief and loneliness and the courage it took to hope again, about a silk dress and an unusual request and the dinner that changed everything. The youngest great-grandchild, a little girl of 4, listened with wide eyes. "So the dress is magic?" she asked when they finished. Thomas and Penelope exchanged glances. "Not magic exactly," Penelope said, "but special. It brought two lonely people together and gave them a second chance at love." "I want a magic dress," the little girl announced, and everyone laughed. Later, when the party had wound down and most of the family had gone home, Penelope carefully folded the wedding dress and placed it back in the cedar chest. Her hands, now spotted with age and knobby from arthritis, moved over the silk with reverence. "Are you all right?" Thomas asked from the doorway. "Just thinking about the journey this dress has been on. From my wedding to Robert to hanging for sale in Deadwood, to our first dinner together, to our wedding, to Sarah's wedding, to tonight. It has seen so much. It is just a dress, sweetheart." "No," Penelope said firmly. "It is more than that. It is a symbol of hope and new beginnings. It is proof that even when everything seems lost, life can surprise you with unexpected blessings." Thomas crossed the room and put his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on top of her head. "I love you, Penelope Morrison. I have loved you for 30 years, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond. I love you too. Thank you for taking a chance on a sad widow selling her wedding dress. Thank you for taking a chance on a rancher with an unusual request." They stood there together, holding each other in the bedroom where they had shared so many nights, so many conversations, so much life. The dress lay in its chest, silk and lace and memories, a silent witness to the love story it had sparked. Thomas and Penelope lived to see their 40th anniversary, an event celebrated with even more grandchildren and great-grandchildren than before. The ranch continued to thrive under Bobby's management, now with his own sons helping run things. Margaret's children were scattered across the territory, but they all came home for important occasions. Sarah, now in her late 50s, still lived in Deadwood with her husband. She visited the ranch regularly, and she and Penelope remained as close as they had been when Sarah was 18 and desperate for a mother figure. When Thomas died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 75, Penelope felt like half of herself had been torn away. But she did not shatter. She had learned years ago that love did not end with death, that the people we lost remained part of us even after they were gone. She lived another 5 years, spending her final time surrounded by family, still sewing when her hands allowed it, still telling stories about the old days to anyone who would listen. The wedding dress stayed in the cedar chest, too fragile now for wearing but still precious. When Penelope passed away at the age of 63, holding the hands of her children and grandchildren, her last words were about Thomas. "Tell him I am coming," she whispered. "Tell him to wait for me." She was buried next to Thomas on a hill overlooking the ranch, beneath a simple marker that read, "Penelope Foster Morrison, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother, 1854–1917. The wedding dress was passed down to Bobby's oldest daughter, who treasured it but never wore it, understanding that it was more relic than garment now. Eventually, it would find its way to a museum, a piece of Dakota Territory history, with a placard telling the story of the widow who sold it and the rancher who bought it and asked her to wear it again. But that was far in the future. For now, the dress remained with the family, a tangible reminder of a love that had begun with grief and ended with joy, of two lonely people who found each other against all odds and built a life that lasted long after they were gone. And somewhere, perhaps, Thomas and Penelope were together again, young and whole, dancing in silk and starlight, their love as eternal as the Dakota sky.